Welcome back to Corralling the Chaos, the podcast for live event production and crew-based companies who are done letting the complexity of this business run them instead of the other way around. I'm Dani Porter-Condon, the VP of Marketing here at LASSO, filling in for Angela today. And if you've been with us for a while, you know this show exists because the operational reality of running an event company has never really had a seat at the table. No dedicated industry classification, no software built specifically for us, no investor category that actually understands what we do. Just a whole lot of brilliant, hardworking people duct taping solutions together and calling it a system. That's what we talk about here, the real stuff, the crew chaos, the gear headaches, the payroll nightmares, the moment you realize the tools you're using were never actually built for your business, and more importantly, what to do about it. Today's episode is one I've been wanting to record for a long time because it gets at something that sits underneath almost every operational problem in this industry, and most people in it have never thought about it this way. We're talking about why the live event production world has been so chronically underserved by technology, why the software that keeps showing up when you go looking for solutions was never actually built for you, and the difference between managing an event and operating one, because those are not the same job and they don't require the same tools. And confusing the two has cost this industry an enormous amount of time, money, and unnecessary chaos. There's a version of your business that runs smoothly. Crew shows up knowing exactly where they need to be, gears where you think it is, and payroll closes without a fire drill. Leadership isn't CC'd on every problem just to keep things from falling through the cracks. But most small production company owners I talk to know that version exists. They just can't figure out why their current tools keep getting in the way of it. And here's what I've learned after talking to hundreds of people in the industry. The chaos isn't coming from your team. It's coming from the complexity of live events, and it's coming from a category problem that no one has ever properly named. Today, I want to talk to you about why that gap exists and what it actually takes to close it. And to do that, I have to start somewhere most people in this industry have never thought to look: a government database. Here's something that might surprise you. The live events production industry doesn't have its own SIC code, doesn't have its own NAICS code. For those who aren't familiar, those are the standardized classification systems that government and financial institutions use to categorize industries. Every major industry has one: retail, healthcare, manufacturing, and software. Live event production doesn't exist as a formal category. Depending on how you've classified your own business, you might be filed under amusement and recreation services or buildings, theatrical productions. It's scattered across 5 buckets that were never designed to describe. It's scattered across 4 or 5 buckets that were never designed to describe what you actually do. That might sound like a bureaucratic footnote, but here's why it matters. When an industry doesn't have a formal identity, it doesn't get studied properly. It doesn't attract investors who understand it, and it doesn't get software built specifically for it. And the people working inside spend years wondering why every solution they find feels like it was built for somebody else. Because it was. And when your software wasn't built for you, you build workarounds. And workarounds breed chaos. Not the dramatic kind, but the slow, grinding kind that just becomes the background noise of running your business. There's a second layer to this that makes the industry even harder for outsiders to understand, and honestly, even harder for software companies to build for. There's a fundamental difference between an event organizer and an event operator, and those two things get conflated constantly. An event organizer is the owner of the event, the entity producing the festival, the conference, the concert. Their job is the vision, the budget, the attendee experience, the sponsorship. They want the event to happen and be successful. And an event operator is the company executing the work. The AV house, the production company, the crew staffing firm, the lighting and rigging outfits. Their job is the physical reality of the event, the people, the equipment, and the technical execution. Now, here's where it gets complicated. Sometimes those overlap. A production company that owns and produces its own events is both an organizer and an operator simultaneously. A venue might play both roles depending on the event, and some companies sit in the middle space deliberately. Outside investors and outside software companies look at this industry and see one thing: events, but they don't see the operational divide underneath of it. So what happens? CVent and Bizzabo get built for the organizer. The platform that runs registration, manages attendee data, handles the marketing and sponsor logistics for the event owner. And that's a real problem worth solving. But the operator, the company whose entire business model is executing the physical work of live production, gets handed the same tool and told to make it work. And it doesn't, because those are not the same job. And trying to make them the same job is exactly where the chaos starts. When venture capital looks at the event industry, they see event organizers. They see ticketing volume, they see registration data, they see conference attendees. Those are numbers they understand. And what they don't see, or historically haven't seen, is the operational infrastructure underneath every one of those events. The crew management, the gear logistics, the payroll complexity, the multi-show coordination. That world is invisible to most outside capital because the industry itself never had the classification infrastructure that would make it legible. No NAICS code means no clean industry data. No clean industry data means investors can't benchmark it. Can't benchmark it means capital doesn't flow to it. And when capital doesn't flow, software doesn't get built for it. And that's the chain. And it's why production companies have been running on spreadsheets and workarounds and controlled chaos for decades, while every adjacent industry got purpose-built tools. This isn't a failure of the people of the industry. It's a failure of the infrastructure built around it. Event management platforms are designed around the organizer and the attendee. Registration and ticketing, event websites, email marketing, session management, surveys, sponsor logistics. If your primary job is designing the experience of an event for the people attending it, those tools make sense. They were built for you. But here's the distinction that matters. Event management software manages what happens at an event, and it doesn't manage what it takes to produce one. And for the companies listening to this, AV houses, production companies, crew staffing firms, venue operators, producing the event is the entire job. And trying to run that job on the wrong software creates a very specific kind of chaos. Quiet, constant, and expensive. Let me describe what running a production company actually looks like operationally. You have a crew roster that's a mix of full-time staff and freelancers. Availability changes constantly. Qualifications and certifications matter, and you can't put just anyone in a technical role. You're coordinating across multiple active shows, sometimes simultaneously, and gear has to be tracked and allocated and returned. Hours worked on specific gigs feed directly into payroll, and billing has to reconcile against what actually happened in the field. One schedule change at 9 p.m. doesn't just change one thing. It changes crew assignments and travel logistics and gear allocation and payroll in ways that confound fast. That's not a project management problem. That's not a calendar problem. That is a production operations problem. And that's where the chaos lives, in the gap between what your tools can track and what your business actually needs to know. Most small production companies move through a pretty predictable pattern, and chaos shows up differently at each stage. Early on, you make it work. Email, spreadsheets, group texts. It's stressful but manageable because the volume is low enough that you can hold it in your head. The chaos is there, but it's survivable. Then you grow. More clients, more crew, more shows, and suddenly the system that worked at 10 events a month breaks down completely at 30. The spreadsheet has 17 tabs and confirmations are getting missed. Someone shows up to the wrong venue. The chaos stops being survivable and starts being the thing that defines your week. The instinct at this stage is just to hire more people to keep up. But what's actually happening is that your tools aren't scaling, and more people just means more people maintaining a broken process. You're not solving the chaos, you're staffing it. The companies that break through that ceiling aren't the ones who hired faster. They're the ones who recognize what they had was a system problem and not a headcount problem. When a production company moves onto a platform actually designed for their operations, not event management, not generic project management, but a purpose-built event operating system, a few things shift quickly. There's one place where everything lives: crew, gear, schedules, payroll, billing, actually connected. Not synced between three tools that sometimes talk to each other, connected. Changes cascade the right way. When something shifts in the field, the people who need to know find out, and you're not manually updating 4 systems and hoping nothing slips. And this is the one that operators describe most. You go from reactive to aware. Instead of knowing something is probably wrong, but not being able to find it in time, you just know what's happening. The chaos doesn't disappear overnight, but it stops being the default state. Tried and true event staff describe their before state as hours lost every week just to payroll processing, manual corrections, cross-referencing timesheets, chasing discrepancies, and after moving to a platform built for production operators, they cut their processing time by 87%. That's not a feature win. That's what happens when the system was actually designed for your workflow. So I want to spend a minute on what the other side of this actually feels like, because I think when you're deep in the chaos, it's hard to picture. Success in a production operation business doesn't look like never having problems. Live events will always have problems. It looks like knowing about them before they become emergencies. It looks like your crew coordinator not working until midnight, reconciling calendars the night before load in. And it looks like your ops director not running spreadsheet checks on the morning of the show day. And it looks like your team not dreading the Monday morning debrief because they already know how the weekend went. Specifically, your team knows their assignments without having to ask. And crew shows up with clarity and not confusion. Payroll, billing, and execution flow in sequence instead of overlapping into one chaotic pile at the end of the month. And leadership gets visibility without having to be escalated to for every decision. And the last one matters more than people give it credit for. When your system is working, leadership stops being a bottleneck. They stop being the person who has to be on every thread because nobody else has visibility. They get to run the business instead of referee the chaos. One operator I talked to put it simply, before I always knew something was wrong. I just could never find it fast enough. And after the switch, her words were, now I just know what's happening. And that shift from chasing chaos to having clarity is what operational maturity actually looks like. Here's a simple frame for figuring out whether you need event management software or an event operating system. If the primary problem you're solving is how to create a better experience for attendees, clients, and sponsors, you're in event management territory. If the primary problem you're solving is how to schedule the right people, track the right gear, and close out payroll and billing accurately across a growing number of shows, you need an event operating system. And if you're one of those companies that sits in both worlds, you organize your own events, you operate production for others, you need to be honest about which side of that equation is actually breaking down, because the tool that fixes one won't fix the other. Most production companies, AV houses, and crew staffing firms are firmly in the operator category. The software industry just hasn't made that distinction easy to find, partly because the industry itself has never forced that clarity. The chaos that's running in the background of your business right now isn't inevitable. It feels that way because the industry has spent decades without the formal recognition, the classifications, the dedicated capital, the purpose-built infrastructure that other industries take for granted. And that's starting to change. The production operations world is finally getting the attention it deserves. And the companies that get ahead of that shift, that move from patchwork workarounds to a platform actually built for how they operate, they're not describing it as a software upgrade. They're describing it as a different way of running the business. Less chaos, more clarity, and a version of your company that finally runs the way you always knew it could. And if you want to see what that looks like, head to lasso.io and schedule a call. Tell us where you are right now, even if the honest answer is spreadsheets. We've seen that one before.